Good afternoon and welcome to the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin, and Walker Family Law, today represented by Fiona Griffin. The
Hi.
Divorce Support Club was set up, I think 4 years ago now, actually, to provide an extra service on top of the legal service that Walker Family Law provide. And our aim really is to help our listeners to shift their focus onto themselves, to get clarity, to build their confidence, and to navigate their way through separation and divorce with dignity and confidence. So, I'm Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I work alongside individual clients and in groups like this to support my clients to navigate their way through. Fiona, would you like to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So I'm Fiona Griffin. I am a family solicitor. I've been working in this field for 25 years, advising clients in respect of divorce or separation, either with regard to the financial aspects of separation or with regard to arrangements for children.
Thank you. And before we start, if you've got any questions or you'd like to ask something, please do click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and put your questions in there. So today we are going to talk about how do I know when it's time to leave? And first of all, just a couple of misnomers or myths. Although we are divorce coach and a divorce lawyer, we are very much not here to push anybody into leaving a relationship or into seeking a divorce. Our aim really is to share experiences, to give you food for thought, and help you clarify your thoughts in a safe space. And when we were talking about this beforehand, I think Fiona, you were making a point about, this is only your decision to make, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And as you've said, Claire, clients who come to see us, we meet them where they are, whether they've yet to make a decision or have already made that decision. It is very much their decision to make.
Absolutely. And I think that point about meeting people where they are is fundamentally crucial to coaching as well. It's my job to stand beside you in your map of what's happening, not to impose my map or somebody else's map. So we just wanted to make that really clear at the start that, that this is not about pushing anybody towards making a decision to pursue a divorce. Also today, we're not talking about relationships in which there is domestic violence or domestic abuse. There's a separate webinar all about how to leave an abusive relationship that we recorded a few months ago with Karen Kipping, and that is on all the resources on Walker Family Law's website. So if that's the situation that you're in, I would advise that you go and look at that webinar and the other webinars that we've done with Karen for advice if that's the situation that you're in. So, making a decision to leave a marriage or a long-term relationship can be really, really challenging. It can feel really confusing. It can feel very difficult, and it can be like a really lonely decision to have to make. And lots of people, including myself in my second marriage, yo-yo between feeling sure one day and then the next day feeling like actually maybe it's going to be okay. There's a lot of fear. It's really never an easy decision. And it's a decision that nobody makes kind of overnight or suddenly. Even when it looks like it's a decision that's happened overnight or suddenly from one person's perspective, usually from the other perspective, it looks very different. I know, for example, in my situation, that I thought about it for months beforehand, possibly even years, actually. It was something that I thought about over a long period of time. Um, Although it came possibly as a surprise to my ex-husband, it was something that I had been considering for a very long time. So we're very aware that it's a really difficult decision and it can take a long time to make. And both of us have worked with hundreds of clients over the years. So we thought we would start by talking a little bit about some of the fears and concerns that people often have. So sometimes the fear is perhaps of the process itself. And I've heard it described by my clients on numerous occasions as feeling like you're pressing a nuclear button. So there's fear about the process itself. And we have actually created a different webinar again about debunking kind of the process of divorce and the myths around what the process is like. So if you want to go back and watch that one will also be really helpful if that's you. And then there's fear about impact on your children. That comes up an awful lot, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Also, judgment from other people. I think the stigma in society is probably reducing a bit now, but there is still quite a lot of judgment sometimes, or there's a fear of being judged by other people. Certainly, I felt when I approached my second divorce, that was my choice, that I would be absolutely judged as the coach who can't stay married. Actually, that didn't happen. And I would say that in all of the cases that I've worked with, the judgment that people have been afraid of usually doesn't come about, and they usually don't feel it, and actually people are very supportive. What other ones would you say are some of the main ones that you come across, Fiona?
Yeah, so I suppose the biggest one that I would come across with clients is the impact on their finances,
Mm,
and just so many unknowns when you are approaching this decision. The fear of the unknown impact on your
mm.
finances, whether you are financially perhaps dependent on your spouse, or even if you are actually the main earner. There can be fear and trepidation on both sides of that. Um, and I
I
think,
think it's, sorry, go on.
oh, sorry, go on. No, you go.
I was going to say that I think it's really worth when you're in a state of fear and you're thinking about this. Um, your spouse is probably also in a state of fear. So if you're the higher earner and the other person is a stay-at-home parent, for example, we're both going to have fear probably, but coming from possibly different directions. And it's worth always
Mm,
thinking about what is my partner afraid of too.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you.
absolutely. That's all right. No, not at all. And I think, like we were saying about judgment, I think that the other thing that people will say is that they're concerned about hurting the feelings of the other person,
Mm.
that they're not necessarily a bad person, but just the relationship maybe has run out of steam, or things haven't developed quite in the way that they imagined their lives would be. So oftentimes people will say to me that they've developed a more friendship type relationship, that they don't feel that passionate love for the other person that they had at the beginning of the relationship. So, um, and they accept that that is a feeling completely personal to them, and that the impact of that is going to be negative on the other person who they still care for. And
Yes.
just because you want to separate does not necessarily mean that you have bad feeling towards the other person or wish
Yes.
them
And
ill intent.
absolutely. And I think I work with quite a lot of clients in that position, and we think really carefully about um, how to give the news that this is what you want in a way that is kind but also fair, but also acknowledging that possibly the other person will never be able to see this as kind. So it's a really sensitive moment, and I do quite a lot of work with clients around how to do that and how to think about who you intend to be in that moment and then going forward as
Mm.
well.
And also to put it across in such a way that the other person understands that there isn't a route back in, because
Mm,
otherwise you do end up in this yo-yo situation where people try to leave multiple times. So
yes,
it's
yeah, yeah. I think that yo-yo thing is also, it happens before you even say anything as well, doesn't it? It's that
mm,
the power of hope. Hope is a really powerful force. So, one day something happens and you think, right, okay, I'm done, that's it. And then the next day there's perhaps an apology or something else happens, or another thought comes into your mind and you think, okay, maybe it will get better. And so I think for a lot of people, you can spend quite a very long time yo-yoing backwards and forwards.
yeah. Well,
And then
especially
there's
when you add
also,
all these other thing when you add all these other considerations into the
mm,
mix,
yeah,
it's no wonder, is it really?
no, exactly. And then of course there's things like timing, and we'll talk about that a bit later. It's never going to be quite the right time to do this. Um, and then another really powerful one that we'll talk about a bit more is that people are really afraid of making the wrong choice,
Yeah,
of making a choice and then regretting it later on.
yeah.
I think that's a really
It is,
powerful
and because it
feeling.
can feel like, you know, is it just a rough patch actually? is
Mm.
this just a difficult time? Maybe there's other things like bereavement or unemployment or something else happening. And how would you say, Claire, how would you say that people reach the conclusion that it's really over?
Well, there's a number of ways, I think. Um, we can never be 100% sure that it's absolutely the right decision because the future hasn't happened yet, of course. And I think, somebody said to me yesterday, a client, that she'd had advice from her sister that you need to be 100% sure before you take the steps. But actually, that's probably impossible. You're never going to be 100% sure until probably you're further down the line and you're 100% sure that you are now happier. So it's quite difficult if you're putting kind of that level of expectation on yourself. Things that I would suggest that people do are, first of all, I'd listen to what your body is telling you. So stress, anxiety, unhappiness, they all show up really physically. Perhaps you have a knot in your stomach, or you've got a really dark feeling in your belly, or you just feel on edge and anxious. Perhaps you sit in your car on the way home from work and you don't want to get out and go back into the house. Or you've got a sense of unease, but you can't quite put your finger on it. These feelings are all really instinctive, and they're your body communicating with you. They're trying to tell you something. So my advice would be to sit with that and listen to it, to journal around it, perhaps if you're somebody who likes to write and journal, or perhaps if you're somebody who likes to do meditation, perhaps you can meditate around it. Um, it's your subconscious sort of sending you messages, and your subconscious main driver is to protect you. So there is something in those feelings, and you could talk perhaps it through with a therapist or a coach as well, to see if you can get some clarity about what your body might be telling you. But one thing that my a lot of my clients tell me when they're further down the line is, I wish I'd listened to my instincts earlier, which is really interesting, isn't it? Um,
It really is. I mean, don't they say that the stomach is like the second brain or something
mm,
like that, that it's actually, physical manifestation of what's happening? It's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, your mind and your body are so linked. So, if there's unease in your mind, it will show up in your body. If there's
Mm.
if there's unhappiness in your relationship, it will show up in your body. Absolutely, it will. There's a really useful exercise that I sometimes do with clients, which I can talk everybody through. Um, so if you're listening now and you're in this situation, close your eyes and imagine that there are two paths in front of you. The path to one side is the kind of predictable path. That's the path where nothing changes, everything stays as it is, you stay, and nothing much really occurs. And if you take a couple of steps down that path, imagine that you're 6 months down that path. What does that feel like? What does that look like? What's happening around you? And spend a couple of minutes sitting in that, and then take another step forward. And now you're a year further forward. What does that feel like? Nothing's changed, everything's still the same. And then another step forward, 5 years. What does that feel like? You're still there, nothing's changed. And then you can turn around and come back to the start and just imagine the other path. And the other path is you've done something differently. You've perhaps left the relationship. How does that feel when you take a step forward 6 months? 6 months' time, it might be quite tricky. And I think that's something we were talking about, wasn't it? We're not here to say that this journey is going to be easy, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. So what does it feel like in 6 months? Maybe it's really tricky. Take another leap forward a year, and perhaps things have started to settle down. What does that feel like? And then 5 years. And that exercise can be really helpful. Um, asking you to do that in different time blocks is a really important thing to do because it gives you a sense of timing on when and if things might change. Um, there's also some evidence from, there's a couple of psychologists called John and Julie Gottman. They've written some brilliant books if anybody's interested in reading them. They say that most of the arguments couples have, I think they say it's something like 69%, are about ongoing issues that are unlikely to resolve or disappear on their own. Instead, they're coming from things like values, deeply held beliefs, family backgrounds. So, what might be a good idea if you're in this position is to start keeping a journal about your feelings over time and then see if there are any patterns. Are there any arguments that you're having over and over again? Um, those patterns, if you know once you notice them, that can be really important to sort of shift the dynamic. Because if you're aware of something coming up over and over again, and then perhaps get curious about your partner's perspective, what's driving them, what their motivations are, and that can kind of shift you from wanting to win in the argument to wanting to understand. And sometimes that can make a real difference. And you might perhaps want to talk that through maybe with a therapist. And I think you were making a point when we were preparing about this in terms of different viewpoints of what marriage means within the couple.
Very much. I think so I also work a type of work called Resolution Together, where I see a couple together to help them with the details of their separation. So by that stage, of course, they've already made the decision. But it's interesting when I see a couple together, how they can then reflect on the marriage. And over the time I've been doing the work working with lots of different people, I think it's sometimes, I say to my clients, well, perhaps what you're describing, this behavior you're describing from the other person, maybe that is what they think a marriage is like.
Mm,
Especially a marriage over 20, 30 years, um, depending on what their experience, what their family life was like, maybe they think that a marriage is where, you both retreat to your own hobbies and interests and sort of muddle along. And for some people, that's absolute no, that's not what they want for their marriage. But for other people, that is exactly what they think a marriage is going to be like. So for them, they can't see a problem with it. And I think it's really interesting, perhaps at this point in your decision making to reflect on that. And are you
mm,
in this position because of the different expectations that you both have of marriage? And is there a way
yeah.
to express that or to work with a therapist um,
Mm,
to help with those? And perhaps not. Perhaps there isn't a way to get past it. But I think it's an interesting um,
yeah. It's a very
conversation to
interesting
at
one.
least have with yourself.
Mm. And to sort of become curious with your partner about what their experience was in terms of when they were growing up in the family unit or in whatever unit they did grow up in. What was their experience? What was the relationship
Mm,
between, say, their parents like, or their grandparents, or their aunties and uncle, whatever, to really sort of
mm,
start to be curious about what their experience is because they're so that's what gives us our model for what we think relationships ought to look like. And I
mhm.
sometimes wonder how many relationships could be saved actually if those conversations happened at a much earlier stage. I'm quite a big advocate for all couples to have
Oh, I
relationship
think
therapy from time to time.
some
Mm,
pre-relationship or pre-marriage, conversations.
mm,
I think we're extraordinarily bad in our society at flushing out some of these things before people embark on longer relationships. And
yeah.
perhaps, I don't know, Claire, you can speak to this, but I guess is it something that people are more careful of than when they embark on their next relationship? I would hope so.
Well, I certainly do a lot of work with my clients post divorce to help them think about what kind of relationship they want next, what kind of person they would like to be in that relationship, but also what kind of person they'd be looking for in a partner and what kind of attributes they would have, what kind of communication style they would have, what kind of conversations they'd like to have before, it becomes very serious. Yeah, all of those things. I think those things are so important. Um, you know, learning from your past experiences can really help you to have a much happier experience next time. So yes, I would
Yeah.
say so. There are also we were talking about sort of reflective questions to ask yourself. And there are some other things perhaps that you might like to think about too. And you hinted at this just a minute ago, actually, Fiona, in terms of um, are the arguments or the issues or the concerns that you have about your relationship, do they arise and do they coincide with anything else, for example? And are you finding any other areas of your life challenging and perhaps putting that onto your relationship? I know that sometimes when I've been unhappy about something, I've kind of then tried to find fault in my partner because then there's a reason for me to be feeling like that. It's not a very nice strategy, but I have used it in the past. Yeah, or you know, Are you perhaps, I speak to a lot of my clients are ladies in their sort of 50s, and I'm in my 50s, and we're going through menopause, and that causes huge amounts of um, shifting in how you feel, and looking at the world perhaps in a different way. Again, we've done another webinar about that, so you might like to
And
go and
I
have a
think
look
we
at
can
that.
get away with saying that, can't we?
Mm,
As
yes,
as
I think we
women
can
of
get
a
away with it
certain
because we're
age.
actually experiencing it. Yeah,
And I
but
think
I
a
know
big one,
certainly, go on.
yeah, a big one that I mean, all of these things come to a pinch point at the same time, don't they? But I know certainly for me, I'm sort of on this journey, sort of empty nest
Mm,
syndrome, and just so my children are now 21 and 17, so almost 18. And so, I'm very conscious of the need for my husband and I to remodel our
mm,
um remodel our relationship a little bit, and you know think about that in terms
mm.
of we're no longer really so, I mean, obviously we are still mum and dad, but we're not mum and dad in the same way that you are when your children are small.
No,
And so,
absolutely. My children are almost
that's
exactly the same age as yours, and I
right.
and we get all of that all at once. So sort of menopause and empty nest happening, and suddenly you can find. I know some of my clients suddenly find themselves in a house where the children have left. It's suddenly very quiet. Perhaps their partner is also retiring, or they're retiring, because there's that going on too. And life suddenly looks very different, and you can sort of turn around and think, oh, somewhere along the line we've forgotten to know each other or to put
Mm,
each other first. And sometimes it might be too late, and other times there might be something that you can do, and you might be able to, as you say, remodel your relationship. Almost, I like to think of it as create a new one.
yeah, very
Mm.
much. Yeah. And I
Um,
suppose that, sorry, I was just going to say, y- I think when we talked about the preparation for this, the values test, what then is important to you if you're coming through some changes, and thinking about the relationship, and whether or not it's the right thing for you to end this relationship. Um,
yes.
does your relationship consistently allow you to live according to those values, or are you changing yourself in a way that doesn't sit comfortably to fit in with your partner? I mean,
Of
again,
course,
I
our
think
values change, don't they, over
yeah, of
time? So,
course they
you
do.
know, when you got together, perhaps you were in your 20s or 30s, and then you had children, and now they're leaving home, and your values might be completely different now, and they might have diverged,
Mm,
or they might be still very similar. But it's certainly worth asking yourself those questions. Um, am I consistently able to live according to my values, or is this relationship actually pulling me away from them?
mm,
Could be really interesting to journal around. Then there's also a couple of others, what I call the friend test or the son and daughter test. So the friend test is you ask yourself, imagine my friend was sharing their concerns about their relationship with me. What advice would I give them? What would I hope that they would do? And then the other one is imagine that your child is in a relationship like yours in 20 or 30 years' time. And what would you advise them to do? That can be a really powerful question to ask, particularly if you are concerned about the impact of leaving on your children, because you're
mm.
not just modeling by leaving, you're not just, you are modeling
The
right now.
impact of staying as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, what am I modeling if I stay, and what am I modeling if I leave? Are two really good questions to ask there as well. Um, Something else that clients often say to me as well is that they want to be able to look back and feel they did everything they could.
Mm,
And so I often talk them through a kind of no regrets exercise. And this is something that we perhaps talk about in sessions, and then you could go away and talk about with your partner, if you can, or you might go away and just think about it, or you might take it to a therapist as well, perhaps. But there are sort of it's a four-stage exercise. So first of all, you think to yourself, you might write this down, what are my concerns about this relationship? What are the shark bites, the big things, and what are the gnat bites, the little things that irritate me from time to time? And then secondly, what do I value about this relationship? Because it's really easy to get stuck in concentrating on the stuff we don't like and forget that there are actually things that we do like. in the relationship. So it's important to ask that. And then the third one is, what could I do differently within the relationship? How could I show up differently within this? And just brainstorm all of those. And then ask yourself, what would I be willing to commit to doing for a period of 3 months? So you might choose some of those things that you are happy to do differently. And you could then talk that through with your partner, or you could simply do it yourself. Because sometimes when you change what you're doing, it will change what the other person is doing because they're always responding. You know, you're kind of interacting with each other, aren't you? And you're sort of responding, each of you, to what the other one is doing. So that's something that I often take clients through. And I think, do you, when you're talking to clients who are in this position, do you often refer, say to them, advise that they go and seek some couples counselling? Is that something that you
Yeah, very
advise?
much. I mean, interestingly, it used to be a question on the divorce application as a solicitor. You used to have to file a certificate to say that you had given advice with regard to uh, therapeutic intervention for couples.
Mhm.
So that was really interesting. But yes, definitely. And you know, I usually will inquire whether or not they've even spoken to the other person,
Mm.
the other party, because I don't want to be contacting somebody to announce the divorce if they're not even aware of the separation. That's really tricky. So, I will talk to clients in some detail about what's been said, who knows what, where are we coming from with all of this? Not from a point of view of needing to know why they've reached that particular decision, but more so the communication that they've had with the other person around it all
Yes.
is very important because I don't want to make a difficult situation any worse for anybody. That's the last thing that we
Mm.
want.
Yeah. I also know that couples therapy can, and I don't do couples therapy. I only work with individuals, but couples therapy it could be a forum in which you are looking to repair the relationship, but it could also be a forum in which you are looking to create ways in which you can separate more peacefully.
Mm,
I know that there are family therapists and couples therapists out there who do a lot of that work to help you explore how you can do this in a way that respects both of you and keeps it civil and so on. And then they can work, alongside you perhaps as their solicitor to ensure
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um,
There's that awful phrase, isn't there, from the cold name Chris Martin, the conscious uncoupling, I think
yes,
is what we're talking about.
yeah, the conscious uncoupling
Yeah.
that was very trendy a few years ago.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Actually,
But
what they all
it
they
has a
really mean is
very
amicable.
it has a very good nature. I think it came from a very good natured place, but it's always does make me smile.
Yes, yeah. There's actually a book that they used when they were getting divorced, when they were unconsciously, no, sorry, consciously uncoupling.
Consciously, yeah. If you
It's difficult to
unconsciously
say. But there's a book which is quite interesting to read actually, all about that process. And that I think that there is definitely real merit in that, having
Mm,
working with a lawyer, perhaps through the resolution together model, with a couples therapist alongside, so that you can make sure you keep on track. I think that's definitely
yes, yeah.
a
And
growing
if we're
area
doing,
in this.
yeah, if we're doing collaborative work as well,
Mm,
even where
yes.
there are two lawyers, we have family therapists who will come in as a neutral
Mm,
into that environment. So yeah, it's a very valuable work.
yeah. Um, the other thing, obviously, that couples therapy often will look at is those models that we talked about earlier, in terms of, what was your model as you were growing up?
Mm,
What was your partner's model? And how were they different? And which bits of which would you like to take, perhaps to move forward with, if you're both open to perhaps changing some of the ways you do things? And that, couples therapy again can really help you explore that, can't it?
mhm.
Do you ever have clients who go into a period of trial separation as well?
I do. I always think though that sometimes this goes back to the earlier thing that I was saying about, yes, you want to tell somebody in the kindest possible way, but also if you've made a final decision, then that needs to be communicated. I see it a lot where somebody will come and say to me, my partner asked for a trial separation, but there was no real trial. It was just that they wanted me to move out and they weren't brave enough to tell me that at the time. Or they convinced me to move out, which perhaps I would not have done if I had understood that the separation was going to be final.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a very tricky one to navigate from
Yeah.
because it may come from a genuine place of I just test my feelings around this, but I think there is a very grave danger that what you're actually doing is playing with the other person's feelings.
So I think it's time to be really honest with yourself, isn't it?
Yes.
If you're looking at that as potentially an option.
Yeah.
Um, so Fiona, what would you say? What do you say to people when they come into your office and they haven't told their partner anything yet? They're thinking about separation. What kind of happens in that first meeting? What would you talk about?
I mean, we would, obviously, we're not therapists, so we don't come at this from a therapeutic angle.
Mm,
But what I would say to anybody who comes in to see me is that we're not going to, first of all, we're not going to take this decision out of your hands. You know, just because you've walked into a solicitor's office, just like when you go to make a will, it doesn't mean you're going to lay down and die the next day. You don't have to do anything unless you choose it. So this is very much an information gathering part of this journey for you, and a very good thing to have done
mm,
because you know there are going to be a load of unknowns swirling about in your mind, and if I can help to check some of those off and provide
mm,
some reassurance and maybe to set out some timescales for you, you haven't lost anything in getting that information, even if you decide to just bank it for another little while you do all these other things that you've been talking about. So it's
mm.
never a waste of time, certainly.
I think it can
But
also really help.
I'm also not going to give you the answer. Don't
Yeah,
come into me and say, what should I do? Because I'm not going to tell you.
no, neither of us can do that. That's a really good example of us be overstepping into the realms of putting our map on top of your map. So, but I think getting that information, I often say to clients, have you thought about going to see a solicitor to get an idea of what the process looks like and to see a kind of flow chart of what might happen when and what it might look like, because that can really help with the fear of pressing the button and pressing go on the process. What about financial? Because we mentioned this earlier, one of the big fears is around finances. What would you advise that people do if they're watching now and they're particularly afraid of that part of this?
Yeah. So there are certainly some preparedness that they can put in place. I think an understanding of your finances. If you've perhaps taken a little bit of a back seat in terms of the finances, the running of your finances, and again, that's not a criticism. That can be just a natural
Mhm.
way that people run their relationships. Perhaps one person is more interested, the other in finance. So, you know, but if you're in that position, get an understanding and then get in as good a shape as possible. Probably you're not going to want to take on additional debt, for example, if the other person says to you, well, let's take out a loan and put a new kitchen in or something like that. You've got to be a little bit careful and thoughtful about taking steps such as that. You might want to think about putting together a little bit of an escape fund. Get into a separation is a strain on your finances. It's going to be a strain on your finances, and
Mm,
you might want to think about paying off some of. If there's debt that you can have some easy wins, you can knock some debt off, then I would say do that. And as we've said, gather information, don't bury your head in the sand. Because
mm.
if you're unhappy, then the other person may well be unhappy, and you cannot know when they might reach a decision to end that relationship. So, um, the more you know and the better shape you're in, yeah, the better you'll be.
Yeah, that's what I'd call getting your ducks in a row.
Hmm.
yeah, gather all the information that you can and get in as good shape as possible. And perhaps I know that some of my clients, for example, have a joint financial advisor that they've been working with over a long period of time. And sometimes they want to perhaps bring somebody else on board so that they can have separate financial advisor and things like that
Mm,
going forward. There's no harm in getting all of that information either, I don't think.
no, certainly not.
Yeah. Okay. One of the other ones we talked a little bit about earlier was fears around the children, and I I see a lot of clients who stay very stuck
Mm,
in a marriage that's making them really unhappy because of the children. And it might be that they're worried about divorce damaging their children. And I know again we've done webinars around this too that you can go and have a look at in a lot more detail. Um, but what I always say to my clients is, well, there's a few things, but first of all, it's really all the evidence suggests that it's conflict that is damaging to children. If children are given clear boundaries, they're given clear information, age appropriate, of course, and you don't involve them in the sort of arguments or conflict between you, they are very likely to come out the other side healthy, balanced, and so on. Putting your children in a position where they have to choose. I've had clients whose ex-partners have said, well, if you leave me, I will make the children choose who they want to go and live with, and they'll choose me. That's such an unhealthy thing to do. There are coaches out there who can help you with this as well. We've had Heather Rutherford on talking
mm,
about children. That would be a really good webinar to go and watch if this is something that you are particularly worried about. And then, of course, there's the modelling we talked about earlier. What are you modelling right now as to what a good marriage looks like? And what would you be modelling if you were to leave? That it's okay perhaps to leave a relationship that's unhealthy, or it's okay to leave a relationship that isn't working for you, are actually really good models to show your children, I think. Timing. To quickly touch on
mhm.
timing, um, because there's never going to be a really good time. And I wondered, is there ever a kind of a right time from a legal perspective?
No, it's funny. I was asked this the other day, or somebody said to me that they were worried because the housing market's in a difficult state and whether they should
Mm,
put the decision off. But no, there isn't really. I think probably this links to reflecting on whether there's other things going on. Yes, certainly if you're trying to manage the care of maybe an elderly family member or something like that, and um, some big life changing things are happening, maybe you're about to be made redundant or something. I think you just need to think about your own bandwidth, whether you've got the bandwidth to cope with adding another issue. And if you can hang on for another 6 months, maybe things will settle. Um, so no, there isn't, and so not from a legal perspective. It's not going to make any difference to the outcome, um, what you choose, because there's, in the future something equally worse or something better could happen. Who knows? So
yeah,
no, there isn't a
yeah.
legally right time.
I think what I see quite often is that people will say, well, we've got this holiday booked, or
Mm,
it's somebody's birthday, or it's Christmas, or whatever it might be, and it's very easy to keep putting this off until you've got through the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. Before you know it, suddenly 10 years have gone by. Certainly work with clients that has
mm,
happened to. Um, and so I suppose the question to ask yourself is, am I waiting for a sign, or am I waiting for there to be a perfect day? And just to remind yourself that there isn't going to be a perfect day. And for some people, there might be a sign, something might happen that pushes you over the edge. But for many, many people, there is never an absolute sign that this is the thing to do. And you kind of have to accept that if you're waiting for that sign, you could be waiting a very long time. And that's possibly something to talk about with a coach or with a therapist, I think.
mm,
I was talking to a client yesterday actually, and they are just ready now to press button to say go on putting the application divorce in. We've been working together for about 5 months, I think. And the thing that made the real difference for this particular client was when we were talking, and she said, every day I stay, it's another day that I'm not living how I choose to. And that really hit home that
Mm,
every day she doesn't do it now is another day she's got to tack on the end, and that it reduces her life post
mm,
divorce. So yeah, there's never going to be the
mm,
perfect time. I thought before we sort of finish, um, one last question for you, Fiona. If there's somebody watching now who's really sitting on the fence, they're very, very unsure, perhaps you've got like, one leg in either camp,
mm,
and you're kind of doing this yo-yo, what one thing would you perhaps encourage them to do before making this very final decision to
mm.
jump one side or the other?
That's a tough one, isn't it? I think
Mm,
I was just, you know, one of the key things that I always reflect on is that there are no medals for being unhappy, get any praise or celebration because you hung on for in an unhappy situation. So I think if you've done all of these things that we've been talking about, and hand on heart, you're saying I've really left no stone unturned here, then that's the point, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think if I was asking myself the same question, I would, I think I'd reflect on, our brains like what is familiar, even when it's not good for us, or it's not right for us, or it's making us miserable. They like what's familiar because, in some sense, it's safe because you know what it is. And I think the big thing with going into a process like this is you don't quite know what's on the other
Mm,
side. Um, so if your fear is around those things about what the future will look like, I want really people to go away from here with the reassurance that although the process can be difficult and it can be painful, there is absolutely hope and opportunity on the other side. Um, and I think the last thing I'd probably say is that if you answer, look at all the questions and things that then reflect all in all the ways that we've been talking about today, if you keep doing the same thing and getting the same results, you have to change something for things to change.
mm.
And I think that would be my parting piece of advice. So I hope that that has been useful for everybody watching. I know we have raised plethora of questions, so hopefully there are, at least three or four, maybe even five things that you'll take away perhaps from this and journal around or think about or take to your therapist or your coach to talk through. Um, Thank you very much, Fiona, for your insights and
Oh, no, thank you.
for all of your work into today's session. And we will see everybody next month. So thank you very much.